welcome to the Aircrew Debrief.
Hi Dan, nice to meet you.
Thanks for taking the time this morning to talk to us about your really interesting career, flying some amazing aeroplanes.
You're welcome.
Before we get to all that, can you take us back to the beginning and tell us a little bit about what first inspired you to pursue aviation?
Yeah, sure. So I joined the Air Force in 1999. I was just turned 19 by that point, so effectively just finished A-levels at school. And I would never say it was a dream for me or my lifelong desire. It was more a case of, this looks really cool. I think I'm going to have a go at doing this. And I'd grown up around aviation quite a lot. We lived very close to Heathrow Airport when I was a kid, so you always see the planes flying around. And it was always something I thought, that'd be quite a nice thing to do, but never a desire. Like, I was never in the Air Cadets. It was never like my life's passion or anything like that. And it was literally a case of, I got to a stage in my life where I was like, okay, I'm not really sure what to do next. And being a very, very naive 18-year-old, thinking, oh yeah, I could go and do that. And just thought, I'll go and apply, I'll go and have an interview, and just got lucky, I guess, and got in. So yeah, that's kind of how it started for me. It was never really my destiny, more just literally, that looks like a cool thing to do. I'll go and have a go at that.
Yeah. So what year did you join then, and what was your route into the Air Force?
Yeah, so 99, as I said, I'd finished A-levels the year before, so in 1998. Didn't get the grades I needed to go to uni that I wanted to go to, so decided to not go to uni that year. Ended up working in a mobile phone shop when those things still existed. For about 7 or 8 months while my application process went through, and then it was May of the following year that I actually started my officer training. Yeah, as like I say, just turned 19. Yeah, really, really naive young kid, didn't really know what I was doing, and just thrown into it.
Yeah. So at that point, then, did you have a sort of an aspiration of what you wanted to fly?
Well, certainly when I joined, I always wanted to be a fast jet pilot from what I could see of what was out there. And I remember one time when I was on officer training, I was sat at one of those posh luncheons with I sat next to the station commander of RAF Cranwell, where the officers' college was. And he said to me, what would you like to fly then when you finish training, Gogsy? And I said, well, I think I'd like to go and fly a Typhoon. That'd be really, really cool. And he said, yeah, you'll probably have to, because there won't be anything else left at that point. Okay, great. I had to kind of shoot down my dreams. But yeah, so certainly for me, once I joined in and saw what was out there, it was always fast jets was what I wanted to.
Yeah, amazing. So you began your elementary flying training on the Firefly. What was this early course all about, and how did you take to flying?
Yeah, so elementary flying training, which is still done in quite a similar fashion these days, or the aircraft have kind of swapped around. When I went through, there was a school called the Joint Elementary Flying Training School, which was a civilian-run school doing military elementary flying training for people who'd never flown before, basically. So, people like me, no flying experience whatsoever, never really touched the controls of an aeroplane other than one experienced flight I had at Cranwell. And it's very much the principles of flight from the start. Like, your first lesson is how to fly straight and level. Not even how to turn. You're not doing takeoffs or landings or anything like that. It's just, this is how you fly an aeroplane straight and level. And then gradually gets more complex. So the next one will be, this is how you climb. This is how you descend. This is how you turn. This is how you turn and descend at the same time. So it's very slow building blocks. And then you eventually get up to do things like instrument flying, which is obviously quite an important skill, and formation flying towards the end as well. So it was about 60 hours of actual flying. And before we started the flying, there was a 6-week ground school period, which was academics of airspace structures, UK air law for flying around in UK airspace, aerodynamics, principles of flight, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Okay. So after this phase, your flying training took quite an interesting turn, and you went to Australia by the PC-9.
So this was 2000, and what tended to happen at the time, I think it's slightly different now, is at the end of your elementary flying training, you would get streamed to either fast jets, helicopters, or multi-engine. So how you perform in that first 60 hours then dictates how the rest of your career is going to go, which I think at the time now, I think is quite harsh, because people develop in different ways, and actually some of the skill sets that you learn there aren't necessarily that applicable in the modern world, I would say. But anyway, at the time, so how you perform affects how you're going to go. So you either get fast jet, multi-engine, or rotary wing recommend. I was really lucky to get fast jet recommend. And so at the time, the system was the people who got the fast jet recommend would go to RAF Linton News to fly the Tucano, which was our kind of lead-in trainer at the time. Now, in 2000, the entire Tucano fleet got grounded. they had a problem with, I think it was the rudder pedals, where there was some bar that was broken and they couldn't fix it in time. So the entire fleet got grounded and all the courses started getting delayed. So they took 15 of us who just finished our elementary flying training, all in different courses. So I knew some of the guys, but not all of them. And they sent 10 of us on one course, then 5 on the next course. And we went to join on the Royal Australian Air Force pilots course on the PC9 at a place called Pearce Air Force Base, which is in Perth in Western Australia. So yeah, just literally got on a flight out there and said, off you go to do that course. And it's a similar course to the Tucano. The big difference the Australians did at the time, I don't know how they do it now, is they put all their pilots through that. So all their Navy and Air Force pilots who are going to fly helicopters, fast jets, or multi-engine, they all do that course. And they've done an elementary flying training as well on, I think it was a CT4 at the time. They all fly the PC9 for effectively a year. And by the end of that course, that's when they get streamed.
Yeah.
So we went on to do what was quite markedly different course to what we would have done in the UK, whereas the UK Tucano course at the time was very much fast jet focused. The course we did in Australia was I'd call it more generalised stuff, so a lot more instrument flying than you might do in the UK, although the weather was amazing, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
A lot of formation flying, a lot of handling, and then some kind of low-level flying towards the end as well.
Yeah. So what did you think of the PC9?
PC9 was really nice, I thought. Yeah, really, compared to the Tucano, I found it a really nicely designed aeroplane, really quite comfortable to fly, relatively modern by the standards of the time, and it had a couple of TV screens with displays on for instrument flying on there. I mean, still at the time, we didn't have any kind of moving maps or GPS or anything like that. It was all map and stopwatch navigation, but certainly quite a nice airplane to fly, pretty light, quite powerful compared to the Tucano. I only ever flew the Tucano when I came back on like a UK refresher course and noticed the difference then. But certainly quite a nice airplane, I thought.
Yeah. So what was the flying like over there in terms of actual operating in the airspace sort of thing? Was it much different to that in the UK?
I mean, the biggest difference I found was the weather, because it was always glorious, pretty much. And if the weather was really, really bad, bad enough that you'd have to fly in a lot of cloud, then we might not go flying because there'd be thunderstorms all over the place. So you generally only flew when the weather was pretty good. I found it to be really difficult. And I think a lot of my colleagues would agree as well. And the 15 of us that went there, I think about 7 got chopped or didn't make it to the end of the course because it's a really difficult course to do. And my opinion of the Australian Air Force is very, very high. They train really, really good pilots. The quality of the people coming out of that course is excellent. And certainly the guys from the Australian pilots course who then go on to fly F-18s at the time were exceptional people, I think. So the course was really difficult with a very, very big emphasis on instrument flying. So they have this thing called the bag, where you sit in the back seat of the PC9 as a student, and the entire canopy is covered with this kind of canvas. So you can't actually see out the window at all. You can't see anything at all. And for an instrument flying sort, they do this because the weather's so good that it would be easy to cheat otherwise. Whereas at least in the UK, you can always find a cloud to fly in. So your instructor would taxi out to the runway, line up on the runway for you, and then hand over control to you in the back and say, right, and you take off. And you take off the aeroplane without being able to see out the window at all. And you're literally just on the instruments on this little TV screen in the cockpit, and then trying to accelerate. And as you accelerate, the torque of the engine causes you to kind of yaw off. So there's lots of rudder inputs. And the instructor in the front is shouting, 2 right, 2 right, 2 right, 4 right, 5 right, and get you to put rudder inputs in because he's trying to keep you straight on the runway while you're in the backseat flying it. At the time, I thought it was crazy. I still think it's a bit mental now. And then you get airborne and fly this entire instrument flight, having never, ever seen out the cockpit. And then as you come down for your final approach, you get to about 200 feet where you would be popping out to do cloud visual, and the instructor takes control and lands. And then you can open up the bag and look out the window for the first time in an hour and a half. So we did a lot of that. And because it was a generalized pilots course for all their pilots, including people who are going to go and fly multi-engine aircraft, there was a real focus on lots of instrument flying, lots of approaches, airways navigation, the sorts of things that you might not necessarily do that much of in fast jet training necessarily. and to a very high standard as well. The accuracy demands they put on you were quite high.
Yeah. So when you were sitting in the back then, was it quite disorientating with the hood over?
Yeah, it can be. And part of the training is to do disorientation recoveries, which we do in every aeroplane, but doing that when you can't see out the window and you just focus on the instruments to do it, it could be quite hard.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. And it tends to be this thing as well where you'd have these lovely displays, like a top TV about to lovely instruments on, and the moment you get airborne, the instructor will just fail them. Yeah, pull the circuit breakers and fail the display. So now you go, right, okay, now I'm on my little tiny attitude indicator down here and my backup compass, and you fly the entire sortie just on those. What we put like for profanity in here? Can we use bad language? So they had the second to last test on the course was called the final instrument handling test. But what it was actually called was the fucking incredibly hard test. And that was the test where you go, right, this is the point where you have to prove you can do everything to a very, very high standard. And that was like the final point of the course where if you pass that test, you go on. And then after that, there's a bit more flying. And then you have the wings test at the end. But the wings test was more like a coronation than it was a test. It was like, okay, you've done it all now. Let's go have some fun. Prove to me you're not an idiot. And then go do that. But the FIHT, the fucking incredibly hard test, was the point where if you don't get to that point, if you're out. And there was a slight difference between us and the Australians. So our course, we had 27 students, 10 of us were Brits and 17 Australians, and we probably lost about 10 or so, I would say, throughout the course. And the Australian students who, if they fail that course, then they are out and they are not pilots anymore. Whereas for us at the time, because we were supposed to be doing a fast jet leading course, all of my colleagues who didn't make it to the end of the course then went off to fly helicopters or multi-engine back in the UK. And then for those of us who got to the end of that course, then we went on to further fast jet training after that. Yeah, it was an interesting time. I promised myself I would never ever look back with rose tinted specs like that because I absolutely hated it when I was there. It was so hard. Yeah. You got treated like being a cadet again. So we had to march from our accommodation to the school every day. We had parades on a Monday morning where you get inspected by the instructors, just like being on officer training again. And that was 2 years previously. And real silly things like you'd be stood on the flight line in flying suits, boots, and they wear baseball caps with the flying suits and getting inspected. Like really, really strange. And things like room inspections and stuff that you'd expect not to have to do once you got past that stage. So didn't enjoy it. It was an experience though.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So you mentioned briefly earlier that you came back then and had a quick refresher on the Tucano. What was the Tucano like compared to the PC9?
So I flew Tucano 10 times, I think. And my general memory of it was that it was a bit heavier, a bit less maneuverable, couldn't pull quite as much G. In the PC9, we wore G pants and you could pull 6G in that aeroplane.
Okay.
And so but the Tucano didn't. I think you could still pull a reasonable amount of G. And it's one of those kind of apocryphal facts of Tucanos. They're all slightly different. And kind of the legend is they were built by shipbuilders in Belfast and they're all kind of slightly different. So some of them fly a bit funny and some of them are a bit bent. And they were getting a bit old at the time as well and quite heavy. Didn't really have the same sort of maneuverability. Not the same visibility either. Like it's quite hard to see over the nose. So similar in terms of speed and performance most of the time, but just not quite as nice, I don't think.
Yeah. So after the Tucano, you went on to the Hawk at Valley with 208 Squadron. What sort of flying are you doing here, and how did you find the jump up from PC9 Tucano to the Hawk? Yeah,
so the Hawk course at the time was split into two, and I think it's still the same now. So the first portion of that on 208 Squadron was advanced flying training. And that is learning to fly the Hawk effectively. And at every stage of flying training, up to that point, you go to another different aircraft and your speed doubles, right? Yeah. So I flew the Firefly, you cruise at 120 knots. You go to the Tucano and it's 240 knots. And you go to the Hawk and it's 420 knots, right? Which I know is not exactly double, but you know what I mean? So it's twice the speed. Yeah. So it's about learning to fly something that's different. And then the big change, I guess, from stuff I'd flown previously to the Hawk is you're now in a jet rather than a prop-driven airplane. So certain things about that are easier. So things like having to use the rudders is a lot simpler in a jet aircraft because there's much less torque. You don't have to think about moving your feet every time you change power settings. But there are other things to consider with jet engines like spool-up times when you're doing approaches, and obviously the general speed things happen at because you're flying your instrument approaches at maybe 120, 130 knots, maybe a little bit slower in the Hawk. whereas in the Tucano PC9, maybe you're 70 or 80 and so a bit. So there's less time really.
Yeah.
And then the focus on that course is a bit of conversion to the Fly the Hawk. Learn how to fly it, go solo, do some instrument flying. And then it's very quickly into things like formation and low-level flying, and also tactical low-level flying, the introduction to. So learning to fly as a formation at low level. So with a pair in what we used to call battle formation, or I think they call it line abreast now, where you'd be flying at level and your wingman would be 2 miles away, abeam you, and you're flying along the valleys of Wales and learning how to do the formation turns if you're involved in that. And for me, the biggest struggle I had was with the weather. So having flown for a year in Australia where the weather was always amazing and you never had problems with visibility, then going into flying low level in Wales where the weather is often not so great, and learning how to deal with that. Yeah. And I certainly remember one time flying with an instructor in the back seat and flying on that level, and I think, okay, this is going okay. And he's shouting in the back, abort, what are we doing? Abort into cloud. And he says to me, what visibility do you think you'd had there? Like, no idea. I don't know. I've never seen this before. I've come from a completely different environment. And certainly I think for those of us who'd done the Australia thing and then come back to the UK, learning to deal with UK weather was a real big struggle. Whereas if you'd had that exposure in Tucano of learning what the UK weather systems look like and how, I would say learning how far you can push things before it gets to be a problem. Yeah. Things like if you can see into a valley, can you fly into it? Can you go cresting over a hill if there are clouds on the top, and learning to judge what the distance is to keep yourself legal for the weather limits.
So whilst you're up to it, then you had a bit of an incident. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so this was on my, I think it was about third solo on the Hawk. So the first solo you do, everyone does the same thing. You get airborne, you do some aerobatics, you fly around the island of Anglesey, you go to 550 knots, which is the max speed the Hawk can fly at, just to say, wow, that's the fastest I've ever been, and then you come back and do some circuits. So first solo is fine. I think on third solo now, it's again, really, really bad weather day. And I'd gone down to a place called Llanbedr, which was at the time a relief landing airfield on the west coast of Wales that we'd use to go and practice circuits at. So it was manned by air traffic. And I was doing a practice force landing. So in this particular profile in the Hawk, what you would do is fly through initials at 1,200 feet, pull back the throttle to idle to simulate an engine failure, and then effectively do a glide. I call it a glide circuit, but a practice force landing pattern where you fly a level turn and then kind of line up on the runway and then do that final glide approach. And in the Hawk, a practice force landing approach is quite steep when you've got the gear down and full flap extended. And at about 150 knots, I think, is the speed. And it's quite a steep approach. Then you have to do quite a marked flare at the end to kind of arrest that rate of descent. And basically, I didn't flare hard enough. So flying the approach, everything looks good. And then pull back, and the next thing I hear is that kind of crunch as I was smacked on the runway. So I'm clearly on my own, and immediately knew something was wrong because it's very, very heavy. Heard that crunch, thought, okay, right, I'm going to keep it on the runway, call aborting. And what I didn't know at the time was both tyres had burst immediately on hitting the runway, and so now I've just got the wheel rims going down the runway at Llanbedr, and the Hawk T1 didn't have any nose wheel steering, so it was only differential braking and rudder. So trying to keep it straight, and as it slows down, it stays relatively straight. But then as it starts to get quite slow, and you don't have any rudder authority anymore, and no brakes because there are no tyres left, it just kind of veered off the runway and dug into the grass at the side of the runway. And and it was a horrible rainy day. I guess luckily quite soaking wet and everything, so the aircraft kind of just went off the runway by about 10-20 feet and dug into the grass, and it kind of lopsided. And I put the pin injection seat and shut the engine down and got out. And by the time I got out of the aircraft, the fire engine was there to pick me up. And and so I was a bit shell shocked at the time. And so, you okay? Yeah, I'm okay, but I think I might have screwed up. And then I got picked up by a Sea King search and rescue helicopter and taken back to Valley, which was only about 10 minutes away, so it wasn't that long ago. And it just happened to be that was the day that our course was doing our solo drinks. So part of the tradition of the course is once everyone in the course has gone solo, you all get to the bar, have a solo drink, and get given your Hawk patch of like, you are now a Hawk pilot, you've flown solo in a Hawk. Yeah. And so they were all in the bar waiting. And with the entire squadron, and obviously, having an aircraft crash is quite a severe thing. So everyone's all right, and yes, luckily I'm okay. get brought back to the officers' mess at RF Valley. Walked into the bar and they had a massive flip chart they'd set up with an airfield map of Llanbedr, and they divided it up into grid squares, and they'd run a sweepstake on where the aircraft had ended up. And whoever got the right square, I had to buy a bottle of champagne for them to drink. So yeah, it was treated quite lightly. But to the credit of the instructor there, they basically spent the next day. We had a kind of internal, sit down, talk through what happened, what do you think happened, look at some of the data traces they had from the black box, and very quickly diagnose it as student error. You haven't flown very long, you kind of screwed up. Yep, no problem at all that. And then the day after that, so 2 days later, I was back in the aeroplane with the instructor in the back seat, going back to Llanbedr, doing exactly the same thing again, saying, right, show me it. Yeah. And then after that, it's okay, fine, crack on, get back on with it. So thankfully didn't cause me any issues.
Yeah, when you're going back into the jet for the first time after that, though, were you a bit apprehensive maybe? Or
yeah, a little bit. But I think they were very much get back on the horse as quickly as you can. Don't make a drama out of it. It's a thing. It happens. Students make mistakes. Sometimes they are minor and don't cause a problem. Other times you have people eject out on short finals, which happens quite a lot in the Hawk. And so, yeah, it was fine. It was just get on with it. It's you made a mistake. It's not a heinous error.
Yeah.
Well, it is a heinous error, but it's not a showstopper. Crack on and get on with it. And thankfully I was okay after that.
Yeah, something to remember though.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So 19 Squadron then is the next phase, and this is the tactical phase now where you're starting to learn to fight the aircraft as well as fly it. How did you find that change in mindset?
I really enjoyed it. And that was one of the courses I enjoyed the most in my entire flying career. Because at that point, you know how to fly the Hawk. You get in, you can start up, you can do all the stuff without even thinking about it at that point. Yeah, it's second nature. And lots of people will tell you the Hawk is like a little sports car, right? Especially the T1. Yeah. Very simple. There's nothing in it. There's no GPS. There's no moving map. It's just a stopwatch and a page map holding in your hand. So you have kind of the whole freedom to kind of fly around it. But at 19 Squadron, absolutely starting off with, again, low level pairs navigation, starting to learn about how to do attack runs, planning for things like time on targets and making sure you can hit your time on target plus or minus 5 seconds as a pair, weapon splits of working out how to deconflict from each other as you do that, and then going into more advanced stuff. So basic fighter maneuvers, dogfighting, air-to-air combat, and then air-to-air intercepts, longer range into shorter range, and 2v1 air combat maneuvering as well. So building up as you go. And for me, actually, really, really very interesting, really good fun, really applied work that you're doing. And there's some weaponeering as well. So the first time you go to a weapon range, it was Pembrey in South Wales with bomblet carriers on the wings with light bomblets in to actually go and do some real weaponeering, and then strafe firing the gun as well from the Hawk. And that's really cool. It was the first time you ever dropped anything off the weapon. And it really, at the time, very, very based on how well you can fly the aeroplane, because there are no aids in the aircraft at all. You have a little gun sight you can set a fixed depression angle on based on your speed and height you're going to be at, but it's all based on how accurately you can fly the aeroplane in terms of speed and height. And then when you press the button, it depends how accurate your bombs are going to be. So a real kind of mental challenge, I think. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah. Can you remember the first time you fired the gun? What was your feeling? Was it a bit of a oof?
Well, in the Hawk, it's in the pod underneath, and you certainly get that vibration. It's really cool to do. But I think a lot of people, the first time they ever fire it, have we call it a pansy pickle, where you just, which is maybe not the best phrase to use these days, but where you kind of only just squeeze the trigger for not long enough, and sometimes it doesn't fire at all, or you get like one round out. So you have to be really conscious of holding the trigger long enough to get enough rounds out the gun. But yeah, you feel that vibration. But more than that, you're so concentrated on making sure that you fly the pattern correctly and getting your exact cues and making sure your dive angle's right and your recovery height's correct as well, because as you're pointing at the ground in a 10 or 15 degree dive, I forget the exact profile. If you're a bit late, it's quite easy to get quite close to the ground. So with an instructor in the back who's monitoring everything you're doing, making sure that you pull up exactly the right time to minimize the height, maximize the height you are from the ground. So a lot of concentration going on there. Yeah. And it's only probably after you've done it 5-6 times, you think, okay, I actually now enjoy it. Yeah. And concentrate on actually hitting the target rather than flying it properly.
Yeah. So you mentioned then that you did air to ground and air to air stuff. Did you have a bit that you enjoyed most that maybe influenced where you wanted to go operationally?
Yes. So for me, it was the air-to-air stuff I enjoyed the most. I found it a completely new discipline that I'd never seen before in the kind of 3 years I've been flying up to that point. And learning how to do basic fighting moves and dogfighting in the Hawk, I really, really enjoyed it. I think I wouldn't say a natural affinity, but I certainly found it quite easy to comprehend what I was supposed to be doing and the maneuvers I should be doing and how to, when you're doing 2v1, so you and a wingman versus a bandit, effectively, like someone pretending to be Red Air, and coordinating between the pair and getting them to come off at the right time so you could pitch in and take the shots there. For me, that was great. So doing all the tactical intercept work into the close range BFM, and that really, for me, said, okay, I want to go and be a fighter pilot. I'd like to go and fly, and for me, it would have been the Tornado F3 at the time as well. I said, okay, that's what I would like to go and do. So that was where I wanted to go as we got towards the end of the course.
Yeah. Yeah, so if that's where you wanted to go then, can you remember the day when you found out where you would be going?
Yes. So we call it roll disposal, and I guess it's the same now, but maybe not so many different aircraft to go to. So at the time, this would have been mid-2003. So at the end of Valley, you could still go to either the Jaguar, Harrier, Tornado GR4, or Tornado F3. Technically, you could still go to the Canberra as well, which we've had for photo reconnaissance, but I don't think anyone ever did in all the time I was at Valley, but it was still technically an option. And the way that it worked at a Valley, and a bit similar to how you get streamed from EFT, was by the end of the course, you'd get either a single seat recommend or a twin seat recommend is how they worded it. And if you got single seat recommend, that would mean you could go to anything. You could go to Jaguar Harrier or to Tornado F3 or GR4. And if you got a twin seat recommend, it meant, okay, you're probably not good enough to go to Jaguar Harrier on your own, but you can go to fly Tornado twin seat aircraft. That's how it was done. So it didn't mean that you would get those things, but certainly if you might be the best pilot that ever went through and get a single seat recommend, but if there are no slots on the Jaguar Harrier, you'd go to a Tornado.
Yeah.
So there's plenty of really, really good pilots who went to fly Tornadoes. Yeah. And obviously everyone's a really good pilot at that point, but certainly people who could happily have flown Harrier or Jag who would go to fly Tornado. For our course, I got a single seat recommend, so I was really happy with that. Really pleased with how it went on the course. But the staff had said to me, look, there are slots on the Jaguar Harrier. You're going to go to one of those, so you should probably decide which one you want to go on and tell us what your preference is going to be.
Yeah. So
for me, it's like, okay, well, I look around, talk to people who'd flown, some of our instructors who'd flown both of those. And for me, it came down to what looked to be the best sort of environment and what had the best reputation as being a good place to go to. And that's why I said, okay, I'd like to go to Jaguar now. And luckily, they had a slot available for me to go to that.
Oh, amazing. So when I spoke to pilots before and, listened to many other interviews, they always talk about hitting stumbling blocks during flying training at some point. What did you find was your biggest stumbling block, if you had one?
Yeah, so apart from crashing, which thankfully wasn't, I think the biggest stumbling block I had was when I was in Australia. I had, about halfway through the course, I think they call it the basic handling test, the BHT, which is like a mid-course check of, can you fly the aeroplane? And I had one of those days when everything just went completely wrong. Got airborne, turned a bit too tight, flew across the runway in the wrong direction, completely mishandled the emergencies I was given, couldn't navigate to where I was supposed to be, and just, and didn't notice other aircraft on the runway, and nothing that was unsafe, but certainly stuff that was really untidy.
Yeah.
And I remember failing that test, and so that for me was it's not uncommon to fail a test. But certainly in that course, you'd fail the test and then you'd go and do a couple of remedial sorties. Mm. And those remedial sorties didn't go particularly well either. And I remember that was the point where the instructors I've flown with said, look, you then go and retake the test. And if you don't pass that test, then you're out effectively. So for me, that was kind of the biggest stumbling block I had, because that's the closest I'd come to getting chopped effectively at that stage. And it's not the only times. Certainly, when I was on 208, a couple of sorties that I failed for different things, but those weren't as big an issue. But certainly in Australia, as I said already, with some of the colleagues, especially Australian colleagues, who would fail that test, fail the retest, and then they would be gone. Yeah. So it's quite a big point at that point. Yeah. And we had the retest. We have a phrase that the TDCR thinly disguised chop ride of, you're going to go and do this sortie, but actually if you fail it, you're out. So there's a lot of pressure, I think, on you at that point.
So you went to the Jag. 16 Squadron was the OCU at Colshall at the time. The aircraft was sort of getting towards the end of its life by this point. What were your thoughts of going to the Jag?
Well, having looked around what was out there, it seemed to me to be one of the most fun places you could go to. And everyone I've spoken to who, my instructors at Valley who'd flown the Jags, like, it's a really cool place to be. At the time, it was 2003. So the Second Gulf War had just started, and the Jags had been in Incirlik in Turkey for many years, then doing Op Northern Watch, but they were pulled out of Turkey. They weren't allowed to play in the Second Gulf War, so they'd all come back, and so you had all the squadrons at Colshall at the time, and it was a really nice little RAF base, right? Really lovely little place. You had 3 hangars all next to each other, 4 squadrons in those 3 hangars on the same line, all within walking distance of each other. I stayed in the officers' mess, which it's 5 minutes walk to and from work every day, and just a really kind of nice atmosphere to be, and in a little sleepy hollow in just north of Norwich. And before I started, you look at photos of the cockpit of the Jag, and I remember looking at that and going, there are like a million switches here. I don't know. I probably still don't know what half of them do, but I don't know what any of these things are. How on earth does anyone know what any of this stuff is? So actually, that's quite a daunting task, thinking, okay, how am I going to learn what it's going to be? But then there are other things like you go, okay, it's got a nice big screen in the middle with a moving map on. Great, it's got GPS. Wow, this is amazing. This is fantastic. And there's a head-up display and all those things that when you've just flown steam-driven aeroplanes up to that point, you go, oh, this is going to be really cool. I'm going to really enjoy that, I think.
Yeah. So what was your sort of ground training like then before you got to your first flight?
It's pretty quick on the Jag. I seem to remember it was about 3 weeks from arriving on the station to having my first flight, I think. So pretty quick. And then maybe like a couple of days after that before I went solo. So pretty rapid. A little bit of ground training on mechanical stuff of, this is how the airframe systems work. This is how the engines work. This is how the hydraulics work. This is how the flight controls work. And then some sims. And the Jag sim was quite basic by modern standards at that point, but still had a visual projection and a dome. So you would go and fly in that and learn how to do takeoff, landing, and low-level flying in that one as well. But it's quite a quick process. And the instructors in the sim were not all ex-Jag pilots, but all ex-Fastjet pilots, and they teach you how to do that before you actually go to the squadron and start flying there. But I do remember being very rapid from when we arrived.
Yeah, probably the best way, really.
Yeah, I think so,
yeah. So your first flight then, what was it like that day walking out to the Jag knowing you were going to fly it?
Yeah, so the first flight, I think we did about maybe 3 dual sorties, so with an instructor in the back, before we flew solo. So the first flight was with an instructor in the T4, which is quite a different airplane to the single-seat Jag. So I don't know how much you know about it, but the single-seat Jaguar, the GRs, I think is a really cool-looking airplane. And for me, I love it. A beautiful-looking airplane. The twin-seater, what they've done is effectively stuck another cockpit on the front. So the nose is a lot longer. And in the front seat of the twin-seater, you sat a lot lower down and further forward than you did in the single-seater. So in the twin-seater, where the instructor sat in the back was effectively where the single-seat cockpit would be. So it's a bit different flying it to flying a single-sticker. But what do I remember about that? So I think the most nerve-wracking thing is doing all your checks properly and being able to start the aeroplane up correctly, because much like any aeroplane, certainly in RAF training, you're expected to be able to know all your checks from memory by the first time you get in. So you're expected to be able to go out, get in, do everything in the cockpit from memory, start it all up, fly it, shut it all down from memory without referencing the checklist at all. Right? So that's one of the big things from any flying training courses. You sit down and you learn your checks, and there are lots of different ways to do that. So that's kind of for me like the biggest thing. Like, I've got to make sure I don't screw this up. And in ground school, we'd spent 3 weeks of ground school being told all the different ways this airplane will kill you, because it was frankly a death trap. There are so many things you could do in that airplane that would cause you to basically have to eject or crash burn and die. Then, if you mishandle it at low level, it will auto rotate and you find stuff upside down. Or if you lose an engine after takeoff, you haven't got enough power on the other engine to keep going, so you probably have to jump out. And there are certain things like with the stick in the Jag, they say you treat it like a Ferrari gearbox, so you can go forwards and backwards and you can go left or right, but you can never ever do both at the same time. Otherwise it will just flip out on you. So you have to be very gentle with it. And I remember I can't remember what they were, but a couple of switches, I think fuel pump switches in the cockpit. And if you didn't turn those switches on, then you'd absolutely definitely flame out straight after takeoff and then have to eject. So it's like, okay, I've got to remember to do those. And so making sure you had the whole checklist squared away, that was kind of the biggest thing, really. Yeah. And actually once you're airborne, it's okay after that because it's another aeroplane. It feels different and you have to be quite gentle with it. But you've got someone in the back to tell you what to do. So that was kind of the first flight. But what I do remember more than that was the first solo flight I did on the Jag because, and again, not a complicated sortie. You get airborne, go and do some low level, do a bit of general handling at medium level, come back and do some circuits and land. So not complex sortie. Mm-hmm. But I remember getting in that and then looking behind me and thinking, there's not another seat here. This is the first time I've been in an airplane. There is no other seat. Yeah. There's no one to help me out here. It's just me. I can't do anything else. It's just me in that airplane. I found quite a strange feeling. And then I distinctly remember flying along at low level, just north of the Humber Bridge in Yorkshire at 250 feet, 450 knots in the Jag. No one behind me thinking, yeah, this is pretty cool. I'm enjoying that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So this would have been obviously the first aircraft you've had that had reheat.
Yeah.
What was that like?
Well, I mean, I'm sure most people agree the Jag didn't have much power at all, to be honest. So even in reheat, it didn't have a massive kick in it. But certainly you had to be quite careful with the way you treated the engine in there. So engine handling was quite a big thing. It'd be quite easy to get pop surges in that aeroplane. So being quite gentle when you selected reheat. And so I distinctly remember when you deselected reheat, you had to do one engine at a time just in case one of them surged and then you didn't want to misdiagnose which one it was. So engine handling was quite an interesting thing. And in the Jag as well, which I've never seen on another aeroplane, they had a thing called part throttle reheat, where in the dry range, you could select a little switch on the side of the cockpit, which would then engage reheat in the dry range.
Okay.
So you'd have afterburner, even though you're in the dry range of power at quite low power settings to give you extra response. And when that was most useful was if you had a single engine, for example. So if you had an engine failure, you'd use that to give you more power and more, what I call it, a bigger range of power, I would say. But certainly for air-to-air refueling is when it would become most useful because thinking back at it now, I think it's really stupid, a really terrible design of aeroplane. And as I've got further on in my career, I look back in the Jag and go, I had a great time. I loved it. It was fantastic. But as an aeroplane, oh my word, it was terrible in many, many ways, right? So when you went air-to-air refueling in the Jaguar, the refueling probe, which had been a retrofit because it had never been designed with one, they put it in for making it an operational aeroplane, was on the right-hand side, and it housed kind of next to the cockpit, and it would kind of fold out like this. And it's where it sat on the airframe was right in front of the engine intake. So what you had to do air-to-air refueling in the Jaguar was you'd put the right-hand engine to max dry power and leave it there. You then put the fuel probe out, so it was then in front of the engine intake, and then you would never touch the right-hand throttle after that because the airflow would get disturbed by the fuel probe and you might flame it out. Okay. So then what you had to do is put the part throttle reheat on the left-hand engine and then use the left-hand engine to move forward and back when you're trying to air-to-air refueling, which then means you've got a lot of drag on the right-hand side, which kind of yawing you to the right, and all your thrust on the left-hand side, which is also yawing you to the right. So you end up either putting a load of rudder in and having to trim that out, or holding it with your foot while you're trying to tank, or you end up kind of banking a little bit to the left to stop yourself yawing off and flying out of balance trying to get into the tanker. I found it really hard, really, really difficult to do. And certainly I had a couple of times where I remember one time we were doing a trail from the UK to Cyprus to then go out to the Middle East. And it was a horrible cloudy day. I'm sat behind a TriStar with this big buffer. I just could not get in. Completely in cloud, really bumpy, couldn't get in. And then my mate on the wing saying, just calm down, mate. It'll be all right. It'll be fine. And then eventually you managed to get in and plug in and take fuel. But certainly looking back, wow, that was really quite hard to do.
Yeah. So on the OCU then, you're learning to fly the Jag, but then to operate it. What was operating the Jag like in the ground roll environment?
Yeah, so the Jag was, it was never an air fighter, right? Not an air-to-air platform at all, really, other than self-defense. So it could carry AIM-9 Lemurs at the time, but only really for self-defense. So it was originally designed as a jet trainer, but then morphed into a kind of a Cold War bomber, I would say. So where it was most comfortable was low level, so going low and fast. And actually, the way the aircraft was designed was quite good for that. So you could fly along at a level really comfortably. And a lot of the stuff we did in the kind of tactical area was low level maneuvering as 2, 4, 6, 8 aeroplanes in formation, very complex target plans with, at the time, unguided weapons, both low level retarded weapons, medium level freefall weapons, and then also laser guided weapons as well. So most of the focus on that air to ground stuff. So what you would call Cold War stuff of low level routes, predefined targets, time on targets, doing those while being attacked by other aircraft and how you evade from those aircraft and defend yourself against those. And then also close air support, working with joint tactical air controls on the ground, being queued into ground targets and on there. But in terms of air to air stuff, it would purely just be BFM to survive. And certainly on our squadron, we had a US Air Force exchange guy who'd come from the F-16, a completely different aeroplane. And I remember when I arrived, said to me, right, when you do BFM in this aeroplane, your job is to survive as long as you can so somebody can come and help you out, because you cannot win against anybody else. So really it's about just trying not to die in those cases. So where we lived was at low level. That was our thing. And the jet had evolved quite a lot, I think. So really quite nice avionics for close air support, really quite well designed for that sort of task. But where it struggled was performance. And I think everybody knows this, that the Jag was really, really quite poor in terms of performance and the amount of stuff it could carry, the amount of pylons it had to put weapons on as well. So really quite limited in what you can do. But where it lived, in low level, fast, and that was kind of really quite a comfortable place to be. But probably at that time, 2003, not really that relevant anymore, I would say.
Okay. So when you look back then at your flying training, whether at the Jag or prior, did you have any instructors that really sort of like influenced your approach to flying?
Quite a few. I struggle to think of any ones who stood up more than others. But certainly, when I was in Australia, we had a primary instructor you're given. So a guy, I won't mention his name here, but my primary instructor when I was on the PC9 was really, really good for me, who actually kind of sat down and talked to me about his career. And he had done, he'd flown F-18s and multi-engine aircraft in the Royal Australian Air Force, and actually kind of imparted some really, really kind of good life lessons to me about how to learn to fly, and the attitude more than anything else was really, really cool. And certainly some of the guys in Australia who they are really, really hard on you, but also trying to impart really good life lessons. And there was one guy on the instructions who said, we were all having quite a hard time. And I remember he said to us, he goes, do you know what they call the guy who comes last on pilot course? No? A pilot. Okay, cool. That's all you need. So, and his view was, all you need to do is come last. It doesn't matter. Everyone's got a job to go to at the end of this. So you're not in competition with each other. You've just got to get through as a team. So that sort of attitude was quite good. But certainly all throughout my career on different stages. And as I got further on, when I did the qualified weapons instructor course, the guys there who were teaching us as well, again, another course where you are being beasted the whole time to be the best you could possibly be, but taking the attitude of we're all in it together. We are a team and we are trying to get everyone out at the end of the day. So we're jumping ahead slightly here, but again, on the qualified weapons instructor course, where they are teaching you to be an instructor.
Yeah.
So part of that is going to be, we're going to do things purposely wrong so you can identify that and make rectification and correct those actions. But the way they would do it is say, look, we are all going to try our best, and naturally we will all make mistakes, and therefore you can correct those. So the staff come in, rather than having the attitude of we're better than you, the attitude was we are all going to try and do our best here, and we'll try and get through it together. It was really quite cool, I thought.
So you, of course, passed the Jaguar OCU and you went to 6th Squadron. What was the role of 6th Squadron at the time?
So 6th Squadron was effectively a ground attack squadron, I would say. And on the Jag, previously they'd all had specialised roles that they focused on. So at the time at Colchester, obviously 16 Squadron was the OCU. You had 6th Squadron and 54 Squadron, which were the kind of bomber squadrons, and then 41 Squadron, which was the recce squadron. So everybody did the same sort of bombing task, but 41 Squadron specifically did reconnaissance as well, and they flew with the recce pod, and they did a lot more recce training than we did. And previously, 54 Squadron had been the primary squadron for doing laser designation with the tiled pod and Paveway 2 bombs, and 6th Squadron had been the night attack squadron was their previous specialisation. But by the time I arrived, everybody was a bit more general, so everyone did a bit of both, really. Yeah, but we were definitely close air support, ground attack was the kind of main focus that we had on 6.
Yeah, so I've worked with people in the past that have been on Jags and they all loved it, and been down at Cultural and they all loved it. Can't speak highly enough of it. How did you find embedding into a squadron environment at the front line, both from the flying side and the social side?
I loved it. Absolutely brilliant. And I think it was just for me a moment in time of, I get there, I'm 23 years old, I'm leaving the officers' mess. There's a party every night, and on a Friday night you have happy hour in the mess, and everyone goes and gets really boozed up, and then you all go into Norwich and have a night out there, and just everyone in the same place, and that kind of, and the squadron for a fast jet squadron, quite a small number of pilots. I think we had maybe 12 or 13 pilots. And a lot of it depends on the personalities you have, right? So when you arrive as a junior pilot, you get assigned a mentor, or someone who's been there a year or so, who kind of shows you the ropes and what to do. And then you have your qualified weapons instructor on the squadron, who's the guy who's basically teaching you to be as good as you could be. And then you have your execs who've been there for a few years and done previous tours, and your boss, who's generally quite an experienced person as well. And it just so happened on 6 Squadron that the team we had was just made of some great people, like really, really great people to be with, who you're really good at passing their knowledge, and we had a fantastic time socially as well. And I don't really think it's controversial to say that the RAF certainly has had in the past the kind of drinking culture has been quite a common thing there. So there was definitely a large part of that, which is maybe not so prevalent anymore, but it was certainly a big thing there. So the social side of it was just great fun. And as I said previously, like all the squadrons in the same place, all getting together, and when you'd have at the end of the year, the pilots' lunches just before Christmas was absolute carnage, and some of the stuff to get up to was just amazing. A really, really fun place to be. The flying was really good. You go to lots of different detachments, and so in my first year on the squadron, we went to Romania and we went to Cyprus, and then the following year we went to the US, Oman, Poland, Netherlands, Italy, all lots of small debts, and going to places like Oman, for example, where you can fly in the desert 100 feet doing operational low flying that you then get qualified to do. And that is just amazing. And some of the valleys you fly there, or just being on the desert at 100 feet and then going into the weapons ranges and dropping weapons there. Some of the stuff we do is amazing.
Yeah. Wow, amazing. So when you left the OCU then and was on the 6th Squadron, were you deemed to be combat ready? Or did you have to go through some kind of like workup phase for that?
Yeah, so when you arrive, the term uses limited combat ready, which basically means you've done some training but not really enough. So, and I think it's probably mostly the same now, where you finish your OCU and you've learnt all the techniques. So you've learned how to do weaponeering, you've learned how to do the tactical side of it, but you're really not at the stage where you're being good enough. So you go to the squadron and do what we call a combat ready workup, which it depends on what airplane you're on, how long it would take. But starting the Jag, it took me about 6 months to arrive on the squadron and then integrate with everyone there, learn how they operate, because there will be things they do slightly differently. Certainly you'll start doing more complex sorties. So where on the OCU might only be pairs, you'll then go into 4 ships and greater numbers as well, learn how to do that. And then at the end of that, you have a combat ready check where you're demonstrating to them that you know everything you need to know. You can execute the way you're supposed to execute to a high standard. And then you get deemed to be a combat ready pilot. And I don't know if it's exactly the same now. I presume it is. For every squadron you're on, they wear a crest on the flying seat, and you only get given that crest when you're a combat ready pilot. So it's quite a big deal to say, right, here you go, you are now, fully into the team now. You're part of us. So that's quite a big deal, I think.
Yeah. Was there much of an expectation on yourself from your peers then of how you need to be every day in terms of flying itself and just as a person?
I'm not really sure. I mean, there's certainly all through my career, there is an expectation that when you arrive to a sortie, you are ready to go. So throughout flying training, you should be ready to do the next 2 or 3 sorties immediately. Be prepared, ready to go, because the weather might change, you do something else there. And certainly on the front line, if you are allocated on the program, so you are doing this sortie, you need to be ready to do that. And if you're leading it, that means get everything prepared for that. Make sure you've coordinated with whoever needs coordinating with. You prepared a brief either on a whiteboard or through PowerPoint slides or overhead slides as it was back in the day, and you're ready to deliver that, and you've done everything you need to do. And certainly as a formation, when things get more complicated, we have very clearly defined jobs. So in a 4-ship, my number 1 is going to do the plan, do the brief. Number 2 might do the mission planning on the mission planning computer and then load all the data in there. So you have to make sure you're ready for that. And there's always an element of studying, academic study, things like threat systems, making sure you know what you're going up against, what your defensive actions are going to be. And again, throughout your career, not just through training, but when you're on a squadron, I'd expect if I was the wingman and somebody's leading me in the brief to be asked questions about, okay, what are our actions going to be here? What is this range against this threat? What are you going to do? And I've briefed you this, what's your understanding of that? And getting checked all the time. So you need to be prepared the whole time. And flexibility being really important as well, because the number of times you walk in the morning and you're not planning to fly, but somebody's sick or the weather's changed or the plan's changed or there's an extra jet. And they're right, we're going to go do this. Are you ready? Well, yes, you have to be. So set an expectation there.
Yeah. Okay. So you talked a little bit about the Jag was really comfortable at low level. You know, probably one of the most famous places in the UK is somewhere like the Mach Loop, for example.
Yeah.
Was it much more of a demanding aircraft to fly when you're at low level?
Yes. So again, just performance-wise. So when we did low level in the Jag, you basically did 2 or 3 G turns at low level, because any more than that, you start to get a load of drag on the aeroplane, it slows down. So quite underpowered, and it'd be slightly technical now, but high wing loading aeroplane is quite stable at low level, but you don't have a massive amount of performance. So you would have to plan quite carefully about where you were going to go. And certainly when you're at low level, then you had to think about, okay, when I turn, how hard am I going to pull? What's my turn radius going to be? And when you're doing planning for things like the Mach Loop, you're very carefully thinking about, I need to be on the right hand side of this turn so I can apex round the corner and not hit the valley on the other side, which people have done in the past, right? So there's a very big focus in the Jag OCU about low level flying, about being safe and how you deal with that, how you cope with the weather, how you crest over the hills, how you position yourself in the valleys when you're doing it, and at the same time, how you deconflict from your wingman who's, in the Jag, he'd be like 7 miles away from you, and you can't see them, but you know where they are, and you've got a data link pinging in the background of, okay, I know where his position is. So I know when I do this turn where they're going to be, and see them cresting over the top of you and looking out for where they're going to be. So a real focus on that. It's very easy to get yourself caught out in an aeroplane.
Yeah, sounds like it. Yeah, so you talked a little bit about some of the detachments that you went on. Probably one of the most famous ones out there is Red Flag.
Yeah.
You went on the Jaguar's last Red Flag.
Yeah.
For anyone that doesn't know, what is Red Flag?
So Red Flag is, I think, the premier exercise in the world anywhere. So it's the best training you can get. And Red Flag is designed, and it's morphed a lot in its time, but it's hosted at Nellis Air Force Base in Las Vegas in the USA, hosted by the US Air Force. And it's designed to give you your first 10 combat missions in a peacetime environment, so that when you go to war, you're ready to go and you don't have that stress of kind of going for the first time. That's kind of the original design intent behind it. So as I say, it's morphed quite a lot over the years, but they put you in what are probably the most complicated scenarios you can have. So the airspace around Las Vegas, they have a huge range to the north in Nevada over the desert. Lots of threat emitters that simulate enemy surface-to-air missile systems. They have aggressor squadrons who simulate red air aircraft as well. And you get put into a huge, complex mission. So either the Americans would call it a large force exercise. We tend to call it a CAMEO, combined air operation, where you might have 50 or 60 aeroplanes. Maybe you've got 20 or 30 blue and you've got 20 red air, or even higher numbers than that, of all different types and all different nations as well. So obviously we were there in the Jag since 2006. The Americans there with F-16s, F-15s, probably not F-22s yet, but certainly a lot of kind of very, very incredibly capable aircraft. And then you've got F-16s in the red air and surface-to-air missile threats as well. And you're part of that CAMEO plan. So every day somebody will be nominated to be the mission commander, and their job is to plan that mission, integrate all the different aircraft types, look at the targets everyone's got to hit, how they're going to achieve that mission, and then go and execute it in real time as well. So the absolutely the highest tariff training you can do anywhere in the world, in probably the best location with the best facilities, I would say.
Yeah, so with the Jag come towards the end of its life, how did the RAF look to sort of employ the Jag in that kind of exercise, and how did you find, being in such a large environment?
Yeah, so for us, as I said, when we were on the Jag towards the end of its life, we were still doing a lot of low-level stuff, which is probably not that relevant in kind of the modern age at the time. So we were being employed at low level to go in, under the threat radars effectively to try and avoid the surface-to-air missile systems and then hit the targets from low level, either by doing low-level attacks or by doing what we call a pop attack, where you might fly in at low level and then pop up, release the weapon, and then somebody else might be lasering it in. And we would do that by day and by night. So the night team, not necessarily flying at low level all the time, but would fly in with night vision goggles, go in and then do laser guided attacks against their targets. And they might fly at low level, they might not. But the night Jaguar team were experts at flying at low level on NVGs at night. So that's what they would do. I was on the day team at the time, so we'd fly by day. But certainly we were the ones going in at low level whilst everyone else was a kind of medium level up home in the war. So it was very much I don't know, kind of definitely the end of the life of the Jag, really. What we were doing was kind of not what anyone else was doing at the time. Yeah. And it was amazing fun, but certainly you look at it and go, it's not really that relevant anymore.
Yeah. So red flag, that they're probably well known for threat replication kind of thing. You know, how credible did you find their threats? You know, did they feel real, I suppose?
Yeah, so the threat systems are replicated as well as they can be. So they are really well trained, especially the F-16s who do the aggressor squadron. They are trained to replicate those threats in terms of how they maneuver the aeroplane, how they handle it, what they do with their power settings. The tactics they use are very much focused on replicating a threat, wherever that threat might be. And they will brief you at the start, here's how we are going to operate, because that's what our intelligence assessment is of how your enemy will operate. So whereas they might be able to do things a lot differently based on the airplanes they have, they might limit themselves to be as representative as they can. Or conversely, they might actually do things better than they might be able to do them for real, based on the fact they know what the enemy capability is going to be. Yeah. So the threat replication is about as good as you can get, really, I think. So as the blue side, you're really focusing on real life tactics against a real life threat, because you know the replication is going to be really, really good.
Yeah. Did you come up against any aggressors or anything?
Yeah, certainly did. I'm sure I got shot a couple of times, but most of the time in that airplane, I'd be running away at low level and didn't really know anything about it. Yeah. But you get to the debrief and all these sorts of exercises, and red flag's a really good example of this. You go and sit in the debrief hall. I think it's called Suter Hall in the Red Flag building. Massive theatre, huge screens. They'll replay the whole mission, and everybody has kind of GPS playback, so you can see where everybody is. And you will then look at the debrief and do a thing called a shot validation, where all the air-to-air players will go through the debrief and talk about when they took shots, how valid those shots were, and then effectively the mission commander will then real time in the debrief kill people out to look at how the mission goes, because obviously not firing real missiles. It's all simulated. And in the actual fight itself, in the real-time flow, we have a thing called a range training officer, who is someone sat on the ground watching the picture of all the GPS pods and the radar picture and listening to the comm that's going on of who's taking shots when and where. And it'll be their job to kill out the red air and say, right, you've been shot, your blue air, you've been shot, and move them out. And that's in real time. And then in the debrief, that's when it all gets folded in together. And that's, for certainly in the Jag, that's the time to go, okay, and you look at the screen and go, okay, I'm running away here. There's an F-16 about 10 miles behind me. Is he going to get to me or not? I don't know. Am I going to survive? So that's kind of the big show.
Yeah. So what did you find was the steepest learning curve in the Jag at Red Flag?
I think for me, it's the capacity, because in the Jag, the only real SA or situational awareness that you had was the moving map on the screen, which was really nice. So you knew where you were. We had a limited data link between our formations, so I could get an idea of where the rest of the formation was. But knowing where everybody else was, that was the big problem. So most of that at the time is done by listening to the communications on the radio. And everything that's coming out is being referenced to a bullseye position, which I don't know if you're familiar with. So there will be a coordinate somewhere in the airspace that everyone knows the position of, and everything gets referenced to that position by a radio and range. So let's say bullseye 18020, so that's 20 miles south of the bullseye position. Yeah. And the idea behind that is that everyone knows where that is on the blue side, but the red air don't know where that is. So the comm is relevant to everyone on blue who's listening. So I found the hardest thing is having the capacity to fly your own aeroplane, do your own job, and listen to everything that's coming in and assimilate that, and thinking in your head, okay, that's the bullseye position. I know that's over there. That's 50 miles away from me. It's not a threat to me. Or knowing when it does become a threat, and listening as the surface threats pop up and where they are and whether they're a threat to you and what your range is going to be to those. And in the Jag, it would be a case of sometimes looking at my paper map and getting my pen out and going, that's about there. Okay, I think I'm okay. But a lot of the time you don't have time to do that. So it's kind of mentally trying to plot where those things are. And that's really, really difficult. It's much easier in the modern age when everyone's on the data link and a lot of that stuff is sent digitally and you can see it on your screen. But in those days, it was quite difficult.
Yeah, it sounds a bit like mentally consuming.
Yeah,
trying to manage it all. Yeah. So, do you have a memorable story from your time at Red Flag?
A couple. For me, it was mostly about flying, low level over the desert, really, really fast, and going straight over the top of the SA6, and them not be able to target you because you're at 100 feet going straight over the top of them, and they got no idea how to target you. That was really cool. But one thing that really stuck in my mind, it wasn't me, but it was one of my colleagues, and it's more about kind of the end of the Jag than it is necessarily the exercise itself. But he was doing a mission plan. He's got 6 ship of Jaguars in this mission, and he's planning with this US Air Force pilot. And the American says to him, I say, so what weapons are you guys carrying today? And he says, we've got Payway 3 laser guided bomb, which is a really big bomb, 2,000-pound bomb. It's maybe 4 or 5 meters in length, and you guide it in with a laser designated pod. He says, so we've got Payway 3. And this guy says to him, so how many of those are you carrying? And he says, we've got 1. And this American looks at him and says, what, you've only got 1 bomb per aeroplane? And he says, no, 1 per pair, because one aircraft has the bomb on the middle and the other aircraft has the laser designated pod on the middle to laser in the bomb, because you couldn't carry more than that on the Jaguar at the time, and these bombs are so heavy. So with 6 ship of aeroplanes, you had 3 weapons being guided in with the laser designated pod, because that was all we could carry at the time. And then at the same mission, you've got the American B-2 that's got 80 bombs on it or something like that. So for us at the time, certainly for me, I was okay, that's the point where I was going, we're not really relevant anymore for the mission that we're in. And that's the point for me. I recognize, this aircraft is kind of at the end of its time.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. But I think you sent me a picture of a Jag dropping one of those bombs.
Yeah.
Payway
3, 2,000 pounds, a really heavy weapon. When you release it off a Jag, the aircraft jumps up because there's so much weight that you're carrying underneath. You physically feel the aircraft jump up when you release the weapon. It's really weird.
So you mentioned there that the Jag you could see the Jag was coming to the end of its sort of life, and that wasn't that much relevant anymore. You were to come to the end of your time on the Jag as well. Overall, how many hours did you get
520, something like that on the Jag, which was pretty good, I think, for the time I was there.
And how did you feel about stepping away from it?
I think I was ready to, and certainly because I'd always wanted to go to Typhoon, when that opportunity came up, I was very lucky, really, to be honest, at the time. And most of my career, and probably most of everyone's career, is about luck and about being in the right place at the right time. And for me, it was just really, really lucky that I'd done well on the Jag, and I'd been on a good squad and had a really good time. And as they started to build up the Typhoon force and they wanted people who'd had experience of other aircraft types, they started to bring people in from those. So the first guys who went to Typhoon had been Tornado F3 pilots or who'd flown exchanges, and they wanted the air-to-air experience to come to Typhoon initially. But then as Typhoon started to change into a more multi-role aircraft, they needed more people with air-to-ground experience, and then they started to bring across people from the Jaguar. And so certainly as the Jag was starting to fold, they were starting to bring people across. So for me, it's really just luck more than anything else that happened to be at the right time. But to answer your question, I was ready to move on at that point. I think I was ready for a new challenge, and certainly getting to the stage where I'd done close to 3 years on the squadron, 2.5 to 3 years, and I would have been getting posted on anyway. So it was definitely time for me to move on at this point.